What's up, guys? If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right place. Because that's all we do, and we upload several times every month. So if that's of interest to you, please take the like button on a ghost tour, and when it tries to take pictures of orbs, replace its camera with a toaster. And now, let's get into today's story. You know what's interesting about humans? We've been telling ghost stories for as long as we've been able to tell stories at all. And I mean literally, as long as we've had written language, we've been writing about spirits, haunted places, and things that go bump in the night. But here's the thing. This isn't just some spooky campfire tradition. The history of ghosts and how humans have thought about them. It's way, way darker and more complex than most people realize. And so today, we're going to dive into what might be one of the most fascinating and mind-bending histories of all time, the story of how humans have thought about, interacted with, and sometimes even tried to control ghosts. This story starts about 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia, in what's now modern-day Iraq. Picture this. You're living in one of the first major civilizations humanity has ever built. The city of Ur rises around you, with its massive ziggurats reaching toward the sky. But there's something else in Ur, something that keeps the citizens up at night. They called them Gidim, restless spirits that would roam among the living. But here's where it gets really interesting. These weren't just random spooky apparitions. The ancient Mesopotamians believed these spirits had a very specific reason for haunting the living. You see, if someone died and their family didn't perform the right funeral rites, or if they didn't leave regular offerings of food and drink at their grave, that person's spirit would come back. And not just to say hello, these Jiddim could bring illness, bad luck, and even death to their neglectful relatives. Let that sink in for a moment. Imagine living in a world where failing to leave a plate of food at your grandfather's grave could result in your entire family being cursed. This wasn't just superstition to these people. It was deadly serious business. And speaking of deadly serious, let's fast forward a bit to ancient Egypt. Now, the Egyptians, they took ghost beliefs to a whole new level. They believed the human soul was actually made up of multiple parts. There was the Ka, your life force, and the Ba, your personality. And both of these parts needed to reunite in the afterlife for everything to work out okay. But here's where things get really dark. If something went wrong with the burial rites, or if someone disturbed the tomb, I'm looking at you, grave robbers, these souls could be trapped. And a trapped Egyptian soul? That was bad news for everyone involved. The Egyptians were so concerned about this that they actually wrote an entire book about it, the Book of the Dead. And let me tell you guys, this wasn't your typical bedtime reading. This was basically an instruction manual for how to avoid becoming a ghost and how to deal with them if you encountered one. They even carved warnings into their tombs, basically saying, if you mess with this grave, you're gonna have a bad time. Now, at this point in our story, you might be thinking, okay, but that was thousands of years ago. Surely people got more rational about this stuff as time went on? Well, not exactly. Because next we need to talk about the Greeks and Romans. And trust me, their ghost stories make modern horror movies look tame in comparison. The Greeks had this concept called eidola, or psukai, the souls of people who died violently or left something unfinished in their lives. These spirits were basically trapped between worlds, and they were not happy about it. One of the most famous Greek stories about this comes from the Odyssey, where Odysseus actually travels to the underworld and meets these spirits. And guys, it's not a fun meet and greet situation. But the Romans, they took it even further. They had an entire festival called Lemuria, dedicated to dealing with angry ghosts. During this festival, the head of each household had to perform a specific ritual at midnight. They would walk barefoot through their house, throwing black beans behind them and chanting specific phrases 9 times. And this wasn't optional. If you didn't do this, the spirits could come back and haunt your entire family. Now let's fast forward to medieval Europe, because this is where things get really intense. The introduction of Christianity brought some major changes to how people thought about ghosts. The Catholic Church had introduced this concept called purgatory, basically a waiting room between heaven and hell. And guess what? The souls stuck there could apparently pop back for a visit whenever they needed to. Medieval ghost stories are absolutely wild. There are accounts of monks seeing the ghosts of their fellow brothers walking through monastery halls, spirits appearing to warn people about impending disasters, and even ghosts showing up to complain about their relatives not saying enough prayers for their souls. But here's where we need to talk about something really fascinating: the Protestant Reformation. Because when Martin Luther and his followers came along, they basically said, nope, ghosts aren't real, and if you see one, it's probably a demon trying to trick you. And just like that, ghost beliefs became caught up in one of the biggest religious conflicts in history. Now, let's jump to the Victorian era, because this is when things get really weird. The Victorians were absolutely obsessed with ghosts, but they approached them in a completely new way. They tried to make ghost hunting scientific. Picture this: it's 1848, and two young sisters in New York, Kate and Margaret Fox, claim they can communicate with spirits through knocking sounds. This kicks off an entire movement called spiritualism, and suddenly, everyone from regular folks to famous authors like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is trying to talk to ghosts. The Victorians invented all sorts of bizarre devices for ghost hunting. They had special cameras that supposedly could capture spirit photographs, strange instruments for detecting ghostly presence, and they would hold these elaborate seances where they tried to contact the dead. And guys, these weren't just party games. People took this incredibly seriously. But here's where things get really interesting. As science advanced, researchers started finding natural explanations for some ghostly phenomena. They discovered that low-frequency sound waves called infrasound could make people feel uneasy and even see things that weren't there. They found that certain electromagnetic fields could cause hallucinations. They even identified a condition called sleep paralysis that could explain a lot of ghost sightings. But here's the thing: even with all these scientific explanations, ghost stories haven't gone away. In fact, they've become more popular than ever. Just look at all the ghost hunting shows on TV, or how many ghost movies come out every year. We're still just as fascinated by the idea of spirits as those ancient Mesopotamians were 4,000 years ago. And that brings us to today. We live in a world where you can download ghost hunting apps on your phone, where people spend their weekends investigating haunted houses with EMF meters, and where ghost tours are a multi-million-dollar industry. We might have different technology, but in many ways, we're still doing the same thing humans have always done, trying to understand what happens after we die, and whether those who've gone before us might still be hanging around. But here's what I find most fascinating about this whole story. Throughout history, ghosts have never just been about fear. They've been about maintaining connections with loved ones who've passed on. They've been about justice, making sure wrongs are righted even after death. They've been about remembering our obligations to family and community. And maybe most importantly, they've been about hoping that death isn't really the end. You know what's really interesting? In almost every culture we've talked about, ghosts usually appear for a reason. They're not just floating around randomly, they're trying to accomplish something. Maybe they're seeking justice for their murder. Maybe they're trying to protect their family. Maybe they're just trying to finish something they left undone in life. And that brings us to what might be the most important question of all. Why have humans been so consistently fascinated by ghosts for thousands of years? What is it about the idea of spirits that speaks to something so deep in the human psyche that it transcends time, culture, and even religious beliefs? Well, I think the answer might be simpler than we imagine. Ghost stories, at their core, are about hope. Hope that death isn't the end. Hope that we can still connect with loved ones we've lost. Hope that there's more to existence than just our brief time on Earth. And maybe that's why, no matter how scientific or technological our society becomes, we keep telling these stories. Because in the end, whether ghosts are real or not almost doesn't matter. What matters is what ghost stories tell us about ourselves, about our fears, our hopes, and our deep desire to believe that somehow, somewhere, the people we've lost are still out there, watching over us. And that's going to do it, guys. Don't forget to take the like button on a ghost hunt, and when it pulls out its EMF meter, replace the batteries with tiny potatoes. Also, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and you hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can follow me on, actually, maybe try using a Ouija board instead. But seriously, thanks for spending some time with me today, and I'll see you in the next video.